At first glance, the katana is a masterpiece of art. The steel is polished to a mirror finish. The edge is thin enough to part a strand of hair, and the balance is absolute.
But for the one who carries it, the sword was never just a piece of metal. It was a heavy, lethal responsibility that demanded a lifetime of sacrifice. We often imagine the wielder as a wandering figure,
detached and free. The reality was far more brutal. Their world was one of constant,
grinding warfare. To hold this blade was to live in a state of permanent readiness for death. There is no romance in the weight of the steel when you know it is destined to take a life. It is a tool forged for a singular, violent purpose. The legend suggests grace,
but the history is written in blood and hardened resolve. Each fold in the metal represents a choice,
and every choice carries the gravity of an ending. To be a master of this weapon was not to seek glory,
but to accept a burden that would define every waking moment. The sword did not make the warrior. The warrior was broken and rebuilt by the weight of the blade he carried. The warrior did not emerge from a vacuum. In the provinces, they were hired hands. Landowners needed protection for their rice fields and family interests against raiding rivals. They were guards, plain and simple. The term itself, samurai, stems from the ancient verb saburao, to serve. This was not a title of nobility or a mark of personal ambition. It was a definition of function. To be a samurai was to occupy a space of constant, total availability to a superior. The individual ego had to be erased. Personal glory was considered a distraction, a weakness that could compromise the safety of the master. Every decision made on the field or in the hall was filtered through the lens of duty. If the Lord commanded a hold to be defended, it was defended until the last breath. If a territory needed to be secured, the terrain was patrolled regardless of the cost to the individual. They were not independent actors. They were extensions of a master's will. This bond was the bedrock of their reality. Loyalty was not a choice. It was the only air they breathed. To serve was to exist. To fail in that service was to lose the very reason for being.
When loyalty failed, the path forward narrowed to a single, final act. Seppuku was not a quick escape from shame. It was a deliberate, agonizing demonstration of control that served as the ultimate test of the Bushido code.
In the quiet of a hall, the warrior would sit, knees pressed to the floor, breathing steady until the very last pulse. This was not about rushing into death, but meeting it with a mind that refused to fracture.
The blade was held with precision, the movement measured, the focus absolute. Honor was the only currency that mattered. A slight, a broken promise, or a defeat on the field could stain a family name for generations.
To restore that balance,
the individual had to prove their resolve through the most extreme physical discipline imaginable. It was a brutal, calculated performance. Every tremor of the hand had to be suppressed. Every gasp of pain had to be silenced.
The goal was to demonstrate that even in the face of inevitable destruction, the samurai remained the master of his own internal state.
The code demanded this final, cold clarity. If you failed your lord, you paid the price in your own blood,
proving that your dedication to the collective honor outweighed your basic instinct to survive. Discipline was not merely a set of rules. It was a daily, grinding process of self-creation. A young man did not simply pick up a blade and enter the fray. He began at the desk. He spent hours tracing characters with a brush, focusing on the pressure of the ink, the steady drag of the tip, and the alignment of his own breath. If his hand shook, the stroke was imperfect. If his mind wandered, the ink blotted. He moved from the brush to the scroll, memorizing verses that demanded a refined, sharp intellect. This was not for leisure. It was a method to sharpen the mind until it could process complexity without panic.
Then came the silence. He would sit on the hard floor, eyes half-lidded, focusing entirely on the rhythm of his own lungs. He had to learn to isolate his fear, to watch it emerge like a shadow, and then to dismiss it.
He practiced this until the world outside the room ceased to exist. When he finally stood to practice with the sword, the weapon felt different. It was no longer a heavy piece of steel. It was an extension of the silence he had built within himself. The blade moved because his mind was already there, calm and absolute. Now, the meditation ends. The training hall is gone. You stand on the edge of the field, the air heavy with dust, and the metallic scent of damp earth. Everything is locked down. The weight presses against your chest and shoulders,
A rigid cage that limits every inhalation. You try to focus, but the world is closing in. Through the narrow slits of your faceplate, the horizon is nothing more than a jagged strip of gray.
Then, the ground begins to speak. A rhythmic, deep-seated thud vibrates through the soles of your feet, growing in intensity until it rattles your teeth. Thousands of hooves are tearing the earth apart.
The sound is not just noise. It is a physical force that hammers against your ribs, synchronizing with your own pulse.
You grip the hilt of your katana. The steel is cool, solid, a single point of certainty in a world dissolving into chaos. You are no longer an individual. You are a component in a machine of war.
The shouts of the commanders rise above the thunder, sharp and jagged. Your heart is a drum, beating against the iron that binds you. There is no room for doubt, only the cold, sharp reality of what is coming.
The line shifts. The horses are close. You brace your legs, lean into the weight, and wait for the collision. The myth of the heroic duel died in the smoke of the volley. You expected the clash of steel, the test of one man against another, but the reality was far more efficient. A line of men appeared on the ridge, not with blades, but with muskets raised in unison. The crack of the discharge was a singular, dry snap that echoed across the field. Then came the leaden hail. The air filled with the smell of sulfur and burnt powder, replacing the sweat and damp earth of the charge. Your brothers in arms fell without a chance to draw their steel. This was the evolution of war, a cold and calculated process that rendered personal bravery irrelevant. Tactical pragmatists had realized long ago that victory was a matter of numbers and coordination, not individual mastery. The era of the lone warrior standing his ground against a dozen foes was a story told by poets, not survivors. Here, the maneuver was everything. You watched the ranks pivot and fire, a machine of death that stripped away the dignity of the fight. The katana remained in your sash, a relic of a dying philosophy, while the musket redefined the reach of power. The romantic age of the blade was being systematically dismantled by the ruthless simplicity of a trigger pull. The battlefield smoke finally cleared, but the world it revealed was no longer the one you knew. The transition was not a gradual sunset. It was a violent collision with the future. In the late 19th century, the Meiji Restoration struck like a thunderbolt, dragging a feudal society into the industrial age by force. You stood on a ridge and watched the first steam engine tear across the landscape. It did not move with the grace of a horse or the calculated rhythm of a formation. It shrieked. It hissed steam and spat black coal smoke into the sky, a mechanical beast that dwarfed the reach of any blade. This was the new era. It moved with a terrifying, unceasing velocity. The feudal order, which had held sway for 700 years, fractured under the weight of this iron progress. Factories rose where training grounds once stood. The sound of the hammer on steel was replaced by the relentless, rhythmic clatter of piston and gear. You realized, in that moment, that the era of the warrior was not just ending, it was being erased. The modernization was absolute. It was a cold, efficient tide that swept away the past, leaving the sword as nothing more than a relic of a world that had ceased to exist overnight. The decree came in silence, delivered not by an enemy army, but by a paper scroll. The feudal class system was officially dissolved. Men who had defined their existence by the weight of a blade were now ordered to set it aside. You walked to the collection point, the steel cold against your hip for the last time. You unbuckled the belt and laid the weapon on a pile of hundreds of others. It looked like scrap metal now, stripped of its history. In its place, the government provided nothing but the requirement to adapt. The transition was physical and immediate. Your hands, calloused by the grip of a sword, were forced to find new utility. You traded the training ground for the desk. You traded the command of a unit for the ledger of a tax office. The sharp, decisive movements of the battlefield were replaced by the slow, repetitive scratch of a brush against paper. You studied the new laws with the same intensity you once applied to combat, but the purpose had shifted. You were no longer the protector of the land. You were an instrument of the state. Your identity, once forged in blood and loyalty, was being rewritten by ink. The pride of the warrior was buried under the necessity of the bureaucrat, leaving only the discipline to survive in a world that no longer required your steel. The sword was gone, but the ghost of the discipline remained. You found that the focus required to survive a duel was the same focus needed to manage a rising economy. The transition was not a loss of self, but a redirection of energy. You carried the same rigid standards into the schoolroom and the factory floor. The obsession with character over comfort, once applied to the battlefield, became the quiet foundation of a new nation. You saw the same precision in the assembly line that you once expected from a blade strike. The culture did not die, it accelerated. It bled into the architecture, the corporate hierarchy, and the daily rituals of the people. What was once the private code of a select few transformed into the collective backbone of a society. You watched as the next generation applied that same unwavering intensity to science, to engineering, to the reconstruction of a shattered land. The warrior class had vanished into the census records, but the spirit of the blade was now woven into the very structure of the modern world. You no longer needed to carry a weapon to prove your resolve. You proved it in the efficiency of your work, the clarity of your decisions, and the relentless pursuit of perfection that defined your every move. The era of the samurai is a closed chapter, yet the lesson remains open.
We often look for strength in the tools we carry, the titles we hold, or the status we achieve.
The history of the warrior proves this is a mistake. True power does not reside in the steel of a blade, but in the hand that grips it. It is found in the stillness of a mind that refuses to break under pressure. Look at your own life. You face no battlefield, yet you face uncertainty every single day. Honor is not a legacy handed down by ancestors, nor is it a quality you are born with. It is a daily practice. It is earned in the moment you choose integrity over ease. It is forged in the discipline you apply to your craft, the consistency of your word, and the resolve to stand firm when the world demands you bend. You are the architect of your own character. The blade may have rusted away centuries ago, but the necessity of a sharp, clear, and unwavering spirit has never been more vital. Honor is the weight of the choices you make right now. Pick it up, carry it, let it define you, not by what you possess, but by the relentless, daily pursuit of who you choose to be.